Welcome back to Sleepy Lorekeeper. Tonight, we remember the sons who survived a father's war, the ones who stood among the ashes and dared to call it victory, the ones who kept breathing when everything else forgot how. The siege of Terra was not an ending. It was an echo that refused to fade. When the guns fell silent, the sky remained red for 100 days. Not with flame, but with memory. The smoke that rose above the palace carried the scent of burnt devotion. The stones themselves seemed to whisper the names of those who would never answer again. And the victors, these loyal sons of a broken dream, wandered through the ruins, searching for a definition of triumph that did not taste like grief. I remember walking through the shattered halls of the imperial palace after the storm had passed. The air was thick with the residue of vaporized gold and gene-forged blood. Columns that had once held the weight of ambition now leaned like weary sentinels, their marble veins blackened by plasma fire. Between them moved figures clad in armor, the color of forgotten suns, Ultramarines, blood angels, imperial fists, dark angels. They spoke little. There were no hymns of triumph, no cries of deliverance, only the sound of boots scraping against the floor, as if each step demanded permission from the ghosts beneath. In that silence, it became clear. The heresy had not ended. It had only changed its language. Once it had spoken in the clash of blades and the roar of orbital fire. Now, it whispered in memory, in guilt, in the unhealed spaces between brothers who had survived. The first of the loyal legions to move among the ruins were the imperial fists. Rogaldorn's sons built walls even as they wept. Their yellow armor shone through the dust like stubborn sunlight, and their hands that had broken traitors and held the line, now turned to rebuilding. They raised fortifications around the Emperor's golden tomb, not out of hope, but fear. They feared the future would need defending from itself. When they found the throne, they knelt. It was not worship. It was apology. For days they worked without rest, shoring up the broken arteries of the palace, sealing the wounds of the throne room in layers of adamantium and silence. They spoke little of what they saw that day, of the Emperor's ruined form, of the silent machine that began to breathe for him. Some say Dorn's tears corroded the ceramite where they fell. Others say he never cried at all, because to do so would admit that even stone can break. Whatever the truth, the imperial fists built their grief into architecture. They turned mourning into masonry, sorrow into symmetry. Every tower on Terra stands upon their lament, and every fortress they raised afterward was less a bastion than a memorial. Elsewhere, the blood angels gathered their dead beneath a crimson sky. They sang as they buried them, low, wordless songs that trembled through the air like veins beneath skin. For them, loss was not new. They had always known the hunger of despair, the thirst that could not be quenched. But now that thirst had a name, sanguineous. Their father was gone. Their angel had fallen, his wings broken by a brother's hand. And though they still fought, still bled, still stood, each drop that fell from their veins carried his echo. Some claimed they could still hear him in their dreams, calling to them from beyond the veil. Others whispered that what they heard was not sanguineous, but the shadow of his death. The black rage, a fever that burned through their veins like divine punishment. On Terra, they burned his body on a pyre that outshone the dawn. They watched the smoke rise and twist into forms their minds could not hold, and for a moment, just one, they believed they saw wings in the flame. Then the wind changed, and the vision scattered into ash. The Blood Angels left Terra soon after. They said they went to bring vengeance to those who still served Horus. But in truth, they fled from silence, from the unbearable stillness of a world where their father no longer sang. The dark angels lingered longer. Their silence was different. It was the silence of secrets too heavy to bury. They fought with fury unmatched during the heresy. But when the war was done, they carried home not victory, but division. Half of them vanished in the storm of the warp, their loyalty uncertain, their names unspoken. The survivors returned to their fortress monastery on Caliban and found betrayal waiting in the halls. They fought again. Brother against brother, angel against angel, until there was nothing left but ruin and guilt. When the storms cleared, the dark angels sealed their shame behind vows of silence. They erased names, burned records, and taught their sons that redemption was a task without end. They call themselves the First Legion, but in truth, they are the Legion of Secrets. Even now, 10,000 years later, they still hunt the ghosts of their own kin, not to destroy them, but to find a peace they no longer believe exists. The Ultramarines, in their blue and gold, bore their grief with discipline. They became the architects of survival. While others mourned, Guilliman rebuilt. He divided the legions into chapters, scattering their strength across the stars, ensuring that no son would ever again command enough power to betray his father. It was wisdom born from pain. But even wisdom can taste like loss. The breaking of the legions was not just strategy. It was penance. The brothers who had once shared battlefields and blood were now separated by law. Each chapter became a solitary echo of something that had once been whole. And in every fortress monastery, beneath the oaths and rituals, lay the same quiet truth. The Great Crusade was over. The dream was dead. All that remained was maintenance. Of walls, of doctrines, of wounds that would never heal. After the ashes settled, Terra became a mausoleum. The imperial palace turned from fortress to reliquary. Statues rose where comrades had fallen. Candles burned in rooms where laughter had once echoed. And above it all, the Astronomicon began to shine. The Emperor's final breath stretched thin across the void, a beacon for those who could not bear the darkness. In that light, the sons who survived began to fade, some into myth, some into madness, all into memory. They did not age as mortals do. Their flesh was still strong, their armor still gleamed, but inside, something hollowed. They had fought for the future, but what awaited them was only the past, repeated endlessly in ceremony and liturgy. They had won the war, and yet none of them could remember what victory was supposed to feel like. When night fell on Terra, you could walk through the ruins and hear them. Not voices exactly, but the echo of steps that no longer needed to move. The sound of hands polishing weapons for battles that would never come. The low hum of prayers recited not for faith, but to drown out silence. Somewhere within the labyrinth of the palace, an imperial fist placed his palm on the wall he had built, and whispered the name of a brother he had killed. A blood angel knelt before a shrine of molten gold, and asked for dreams that did not end in wings torn by betrayal. A dark angel sat beneath a cracked window and stared into the night, waiting for a redemption he no longer believed would arrive. And a lone Ultramarine stood on a balcony overlooking the dead world and thought of a time when blue meant hope, not memory. The stars above burned bright, unchanging, indifferent. And beneath their light, the sons of the Emperor learned the hardest truth of all, that loyalty does not save you from sorrow. It only teaches you how to carry it. The centuries that followed the heresy were called the Age of Rebuilding, but for the sons who survived, it was the Age of Silence. They returned to their fortresses and battle barges, each carrying the same invisible wound, the knowledge that they had killed their brothers, and in doing so, had killed a part of themselves. They rebuilt empires, repaired ships, reforged armor, but nothing could mend what had been torn inside their souls. For some, the wound bled inward, quietly. For others, it became a fever that never cooled. They did not speak of it. They were not allowed to. Their oaths demanded obedience, not confession. And so they carried their grief as they carried their bolters, always ready, always loaded, never far from reach. Among the ruins of Baal, the sons of Sanguinius rebuilt their red citadel. The blood angels were a vision of beauty on the battlefield, wings of gold, faces carved from tragic faith. But within them, something darker stirred. When their father fell, something broke that could not be reforged. They called it the red thirst at first, a hunger for perfection, for the purity of Sanguinius's sacrifice. But soon it became something else, a memory of death that lived inside their blood. They saw his final moments over and over again. The archangel falling beneath the War Master's blade, wings torn, halo dimming, heart split open like the world itself. It was not just a story they remembered. It was an inheritance. The black rage came to them like a plague of ghosts. In their dreams, they became their father, reliving his death, feeling the War Master's strike again and again. And when they awoke screaming, not in pain, but in sorrow. They fought their brothers, clawed at walls, tore at their own flesh, begging the memory to end. It never did. The chaplains of the chapter learned to guide the afflicted to the death company. Warriors who would die in battle, lost in the madness of memory, convinced they were avenging their angel even as they bled for the Emperor. They fought with beauty. They died with grace. And the blood angels watched them go with envy. Because the truth was this: the ones who died were the lucky ones. The rest were left behind, remembering. Far away, the Imperial fists built walls that touched the sky. Their father, Dorn, believed that duty was the cure for despair, that structure could contain sorrow. He was wrong. They built fortresses around their pain until the fortresses became prisons. The fists rebuilt Terra, rebuilt the fortresses of the segmentum solar, rebuilt every world that would have them. But in every block of stone they laid, they buried a fragment of their own humanity. They learned to mistake endurance for healing and silence for strength. When the Codex Astartes came, they obeyed. They divided their legion into chapters, and though the walls held, their hearts cracked. Dorn himself retreated into the void, consumed by a duty no one else could understand. He fought until there was nothing left to fight, until even his hands, those hands that had built the Emperor's citadel, were lost to the warp. Some say he died in battle. Others say he simply walked away, unable to bear another dawn without purpose. His sons carried on. The Crimson Fists, the Black Templars, the Soul Drinkers, each a fragment of his will, each a scar shaped like duty. They built crusades that never ended, sieges that could never be won, wars that justified their own continuation. Because if they ever stopped fighting, they might have had to feel again. And that they could not endure. The Dark Angels hid their pain behind ritual. They turned guilt into liturgy, confession into code. They hunted their fallen brothers across time and space, not to forgive them, but to hide their shame beneath the armor of purpose. They became inquisitors of their own souls, zealots against their own reflections. They swore to keep the secret of Caliban forever. But secrets are living things. They grow teeth when kept too long. The inner circle carried the truth like poison in the mouth, passing it down generation after generation, until none remembered the world before sin. For them, repentance was not an act. It was identity. In the darkness of their fortress, they built chambers of penitence, where no one screamed, not because of mercy, but because screaming was forbidden. They told themselves it was justice. But deep inside, even they knew that justice had left with their father. The Ultramarines survived by turning faith into order. They buried emotion beneath the weight of doctrine. Their father, Guilliman, saw that humanity could not survive another civil war, and so he gave it the Codex Astartes, not just as a manual of war, but as a scripture. Every page a commandment, every strategy a psalm. They obeyed it as zealots obey prophecy. The Codex became their cathedral, and within it they found safety. But safety is a quiet kind of death. In the years that followed, they became the perfect sons, dutiful, disciplined, unyielding. But they forgot how to feel joy. They fought for worlds they would never visit again, for people who no longer believed in them, under banners whose meaning faded with each millennium. And though Guilliman returned in time, walking once more among his children, they could not look him in the eye, because the last thing they saw before he fell into stasis was hope. And hope had become too heavy to carry. Even the salamanders, kindest of all legions, bore their share of ghosts. They had tried to save civilians during the heresy, to shield the helpless while gods and monsters waged war. They succeeded, but only in part. Their compassion became legend, but so did their losses. For every life they saved, a brother died. For every world they protected, another burned. And though they spoke softly, though they still tended fires and forged tools for others, the light behind their eyes dimmed with each passing century. They remembered too much: the smell of burning cities, the sound of children crying in the distance, the sight of the Emperor's light dimming as the sky fell apart. Their kindness became armor. Their gentleness became discipline. They never stopped saving others, but none of them learned how to save themselves. For 10,000 years, the legions that remained wore their grief like heraldry. Every symbol, every color, every title was a scar disguised as pride. Gold for sacrifice, crimson for blood, blue for duty, black for repentance. They marched beneath banners woven from the remnants of their fathers' dreams, and none dared ask if those dreams were still worth dying for. To remember became their only prayer. To forget would be betrayal. And so they remembered, endlessly, faithfully, painfully. Some sought absolution in war. Some sought it in ritual. Some sought it in silence. But none of them found peace, because peace, like innocence, is a thing that once lost cannot be rebuilt. It can only be remembered, even now, when the galaxy calls them heroes, when the ecclesiarchy carves their likeness into cathedrals of stone and light. The sons who survived still wake from dreams of fire. They see their brothers' faces in the smoke. They hear the crackle of burning banners, the thunder of the last battle. And in the silence that follows, they hear one question whispered again and again. A question they have no answer for. If we were the loyal ones, why does it still hurt this much? The answer never comes. It never will. Some wounds are too deep to heal, and some wars never truly end. They simply change their names. Not all who remembered wore the colors of loyalty. Some carried their memories into the abyss. And there, in the slow corrosion of eternity, they discovered that forgetting was impossible, even for the damned. The traitor legions did not die with Horus. They were unmade, yes, scattered, hunted, burned from the records of the Imperium. But you cannot erase what still dreams. Each of them carried a fragment of the same unbearable inheritance, the memory of what they once were. A brotherhood, a promise, a family that became a wound. They would deny it, of course. They would cloak themselves in rage, in blasphemy, in new gods and impossible doctrines. But beneath the armor of corruption and the laughter of demons, there was always the faint sound of mourning. Among the eye of terror's burning storms, the sons of Horus tried to rebuild their identity from the ashes of treason. Once they had been the War Master's chosen, the sharp edge of the Emperor's will. They had carried his banners to the edge of creation. Now they carried only his shadow. When Horus fell, they shattered. Some cursed his name. Others worshipped it. Some took their own lives in silence, unable to reconcile the God they had betrayed with the corpse they had served. Ezekiel Abaddon gathered what remained. He reforged them into the Black Legion, not loyal, not repentant, but defiant. He cast away their old names, their old sigils, their old shame. He told them they would serve chaos, but in truth, they served memory. For in every world they burned, every cathedral they defiled, they were not destroying the Imperium. They were trying to prove it had once been theirs. Abaddon's crusades were not the wars of a conqueror. They were the rituals of a man who could not stop remembering. Every Black Crusade, every assault upon the Imperium was a distorted echo of the Great Crusade. The same shape, inverted, poisoned, repeated. The same yearning to build something eternal, even if it had to be carved from ruin. And so they marched, not as traitors, not as monsters, but as orphans who never learned how to bury their father. The Death Guard wandered through pestilence and rot. They had once been warriors of endurance, Mortarian's sons, who saw purity in suffering, who believed strength was found in denial. But the plague that saved them from death during the siege became their eternity. Now they rotted but could not die. Their armor pulsed like diseased flesh, their lungs filled with laughter that was not theirs. They worshipped decay because it was the only constant left. And yet, somewhere within that endless infection, the old discipline remained. Each ritual of corrosion was performed with the same precision they had once reserved for battle drills. Each disease they spread was catalogued, studied, named. They called it devotion. But it was grief. The grief of men who had once sought freedom and found only servitude. They had fought to escape tyranny and found themselves enslaved to entropy. Still, they remembered the air of Barbarous, the cold wind of the high mountains, the first breath they took in a world that hated them. They remembered Mortarian's promise that pain could be overcome. They laughed now when they said it, but beneath the laughter, the ache remained. The word-bearers remembered differently. Their father, Lorgar, had loved the Emperor too much, and that love was his undoing. When his faith was scorned, he did not abandon belief. He only redirected it. Where once he preached the divinity of the Emperor, now he preached the divinity of the void. His sons followed, not out of malice, but out of heartbreak. They wrote new scriptures in blood and ash, carved cathedrals of bone, turned every battlefield into a sermon. They were poets of despair, liturgists of damnation. And yet, even they could not hide from the truth that they had been made to believe. The word-bearers remembered devotion better than anyone. It haunted them, the way a song haunts a man who can't remember its words. They could not stop believing, even when belief itself became poison. Their hymns to chaos carried the same rhythm as their hymns to the Emperor. Their prayers had the same cadence, the same desperate need to be heard. And in the eye of terror, where time loops upon itself like a wound that will not close, their voices still echo the old names. Even now, when they raise their eyes to the warp and see gods staring back, a few still whisper, "Father," before they remember which one they mean. The world eaters, sons of Angron, no longer remember words, but they remember feeling. Rage was their language, and they spoke it fluently. When the nails sang, they obeyed, killing to silence the pain that killing caused. They tore apart the galaxy because the noise of slaughter was the only thing louder than their thoughts. But in the rare moments between battles, when the blood cooled and the static in their skulls receded, some of them would stop and look at their reflection in a blade. And for a heartbeat, they would remember what it was to be human. They would see the scars of surgeries forced upon them, the eyes that had once known loyalty, and they would shudder. Then the nails would sing again, and the mercy of forgetfulness would return. But in that brief silence, in that heartbeat of lucidity, even the maddest of Angron's sons could feel the wound of remembrance. They were not born monsters. They were made into monsters by men who mistook obedience for perfection. And though the galaxy calls them beasts, Their rage is only grief without vocabulary. The 1,000 Sons carried remembrance as a curse. Their tragedy was knowledge, their sin, understanding. They had sought truth, not rebellion. They had wanted to heal, not destroy. But in a universe that fears what it cannot control, wisdom is always mistaken for heresy. Their father, Magnus, still wanders the dust seas of the warp, his great eye filled with regret. His sons follow him, fragmented into shards of mind and matter. They call upon powers beyond comprehension, but their sorcery is not ambition. It is desperation. Each spell is an act of preservation, a plea to hold on to what remains of themselves before it unravels into the void. They remember Prospero, the sound of its libraries burning, the smell of parchment and flesh mingling in the fire. They remember the wolves who came not to conquer, but to destroy. They remember the Emperor's judgment and how love can wound more deeply than hate. And though they wear the sigil of Tzinch now, the god of change, their hearts remain frozen in that single moment of loss. Even as they reshape reality with words of power, they cannot reshape the past. They are the scholars of tragedy, fluent in the language of inevitability. There were others, too. The Iron Warriors, who built empires of fortification and found themselves trapped inside them. The Alpha Legion, who played both sides so well they forgot which one was theirs. The Night Lords, who turned fear into doctrine until it consumed them. All of them different, all of them bound by the same truth. They remembered. And remembrance, for them, was the cruelest damnation of all, because chaos, in its endless hunger, devours meaning. But memory resists. It clings, even when corrupted, even when rewritten. It endures because it must. And so, across 10,000 years, the traitor legions still dream. They dream of the man they once called father, the man they betrayed, the man who made them. They dream of the great crusade, of the stars they conquered in his name. They dream of camaraderie, of purpose, of a time when their hands built instead of burned. And when they wake screaming, not from horror, but from recognition. They are the cursed sons, damned not because they rebelled, but because they remember what loyalty felt like. In the eye of terror, there are planets made entirely of memory, worlds built from the echoes of moments that no longer exist. The traitor legions walk upon them as pilgrims, retracing the steps of their own downfall. Some still wear the colors of their old legions, faded and twisted by time. Others carve the names of their fallen brothers into armor of demonic flesh. They say the names aloud as they march. And for a moment, even the warp grows quiet. Because even the gods understand grief. They may not know forgiveness, but they know loss. And perhaps that is why the chaos gods keep their sons alive, because their suffering is sacred, their memory divine. For in a universe built upon lies and entropy, only remembrance has weight. 10,000 years is a long time to remember. And yet, for the sons of the Emperor, loyal and damned alike, the years have not dulled the memory. They have only sharpened it, honed it into ritual, into instinct, into silence. The galaxy that surrounds them has forgotten the language of their pain. The Imperium worships them now as saints, monsters, myths. The Chaos Legions have been remade into symbols of apocalypse and warning. But beneath those banners, beneath the paint and prayer, the same hearts still beat, cold, patient, aching. They are all prisoners of yesterday. On Terra, the Imperial Palace still stands. The same walls the Imperial fists rebuilt still glimmer in the dull light of a dying sun. The banners that hang in its great halls are not the same, but the colors have not changed. Gold, crimson, and ivory, reminders of a victory that was also a funeral. Every century, a detachment of the Adeptus Custodes opens the sealed doors of the inner sanctum and walks the corridors that lead toward the throne. They speak no words. Their armor reflects no light. And yet, through the psychic haze that cloaks the golden throne, they feel it. The weight of eyes that no longer open, the echo of a will that no longer commands. They bow, not in worship, in respect, in grief. Outside, the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes continue their vigil. The blood angels still fight, still die, still dream of wings that will never fly again. The dark angels still hunt the fallen, still deny the truth that every hunter becomes what he chases. The Imperial fists still build, their fortresses rising from dust like tombstones for dreams that never learned how to die. And the Ultramarines, ever dutiful, still preach the Codex as scripture, their order immaculate, their souls restless. Each chapter fights as if the next battle might be the one that redeems them. Each victory feels hollow, each defeat familiar. They are caught in the rhythm of their own creation. Protect, endure, remember. In the farthest reaches of the void, the cursed suns still stir. The Black Legion gathers for crusade after crusade, as if repetition could erase regret. The Death Guard spread their plagues with reverence, mistaking decay for absolution. The word-bearers still write gospels to gods that no longer listen, their prayers echoing into a silence they refuse to acknowledge. The 1,000 suns still weave spells that cannot undo the past, and in the blood-soaked maelstrom of the eye, even the world-eaters still rage, their fury a hymn to a father who could never teach them peace. None of them have stopped fighting. None of them can, because to stop would mean remembering fully, and remembrance, for them, is death. Sometimes the veil between their worlds thins. A crusade collides with a counter-crusade, loyalists and traitors meeting across battlefields older than either side remembers. Bolter fire cuts the silence, chain zords sing, and for a heartbeat, the air smells the same as it did on Terra. Blood, ozone, and regret. A loyal son locks eyes with a traitor, and for that instant, they recognize each other. The face beneath the horned helm is older, ruined, distorted, but the shape of it is familiar. A brother, a memory. They hesitate, just long enough for someone else to fire first. Then the moment is gone. They will call it battle. They will call it duty. But it is something smaller, sadder, and infinitely more human. It is remembering. I have seen them, these brothers divided by time, in the silent halls of the segmentum obscurus, where statues weep dust, in the warp-lit caverns of the maelstrom, where demons feed on history. I have seen them watch the stars and wonder which of them burns for who. There are whispers, impossible, unproven, that sometimes, in the deep void, two fleets meet, not in war, but in stillness. That their augurs lock, their weapons charge, and then nothing. No shots fired, only a long, wordless pause before both fleets drift apart again, each returning to its own lie. I do not know if it is true, but I want it to be, because even gods of war deserve a moment of silence. The galaxy calls it the Long Vigil. 1,000 crusades fought in circles, 1,000 betrayals reenacted in miniature, loyalty fossilized into habit, hatred petrified into ritual, both sides claiming righteousness, both sides afraid of peace. They tell themselves that the Emperor still watches, that chaos still hungers. But beneath the noise of prophecy and blood, there is a quieter truth. They watch each other. They fight not to win, but to remember. The traitor remembers what it felt like to believe. The loyalist remembers what it cost to stay. Each sees in the other the reflection of what they lost, and cannot bear to admit it. And so the long vigil continues. 10,000 years of waiting for a redemption that may never come, or a forgiveness that no one knows how to grant. The stars themselves have grown weary of the repetition. Worlds rise and fall, empires crumble, and still the same brothers fight across the same fields under different names. The war is no longer about the emperor or the gods. It is about memory, about who gets to remember what. Somewhere, a blood angel kneels beside the corpse of a black legionnaire and whispers a name he should not know. Somewhere, a dark angel strikes down a word-bearer and feels no triumph, only understanding. Somewhere, a Death Guard Marine pauses in the reign of his own plague and wonders briefly what fresh air would smell like. And somewhere, an Ultramarine stares into the sun, void, and imagines, for just a second, what forgiveness might sound like. The moment passes, the war resumes, but the question remains. The sons who remember, all of them, loyal and lost, are the truest monuments the Imperium has ever built. They are proof that memory endures, even when meaning fades. They are proof that faith and despair are siblings, not opposites. They are the last testament of a dream that refused to die, even when its dreamers did. And perhaps, in that endless remembering, there is something like redemption. Not the redemption of victory or peace, but of continuity. The kind that says, we were here, we endured, we remembered the stars drift, the thrones rust, the prayers fade. But across 1,000 million worlds, in the quiet between wars, their shadows still stand. Not as heroes, not as villains, simply as sons. Sons who remember. And perhaps that is enough. If you're still here, maybe start the next episode. Or just let the quiet take you. And if you've already drifted off, that's all right. Good night, traveler. Sleep well beneath the stars.